I think a lot of it is stepping away from the social media side of things. Because the problem, as much as social media is sort of my niche and something that I feel I'm very good at, the problem is there's always this pressure in your back of the mind of like if a story breaks, no matter what, I have to be available to like push it on all the platforms and stuff like that. And that is a very bad mindset because you pretty much never get to switch off, which is not good and a very easy way to burn out, as I
Mm.
found out personally.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talk Trash, and stand back with another video. This time, I'm joined once again by a very good friend of mine. I'm joined by the one and only Innes McVey from Inside the Ropes and now House of Wrestling. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tom. I'm very happy to be back and chatting about all the new and weird and wonderful stuff I've been doing in the world of wrestling lately.
You brought that up there, my friend. So, I
Mm,
was going to do the generic, how did you get your start in wrestling for people that don't know? But we'll get into that a little bit later.
of
But
course.
how I recently read, doing research on this, that you decided to say, okay, I'm going to step away from university and I'm going to try the wrestling thing full time. So, how does that come about and things like that?
So whilst I was doing my sort of university studies, I was doing inside the rope stuff already. I'd been doing inside the rope stuff
Mm.
since COVID, and I was doing my studies alongside that. And I kind of basically got to a point where I felt that I had enough experience from doing stuff inside the ropes from, across a range of things, content creation, writing, all that sort of stuff, social media management. And I didn't really feel like the university course I was in was kind of giving me the benefit that I was putting into it. And I ultimately just decided, I have the base with what I've done at Inside the Ropes. And then the opportunity, obviously, with Nick Hausman, House of Wrestling came up. And it kind of all just became a sort of cacophony of let's give this a go and see. And if not, I can at least use the experience I've got from here and put it into, some sort of like normal boring job, if you get what I
Yeah, definitely. So when you have that epiphany, shall we say, of like, I'm gonna leave university behind, the steadiness of university, and go into the more I can't think of the right word, maybe scary what
mean.
of the freelance world. Do you have
Totally.
any sort of apprehension that you're like, is this a good idea?
Oh, totally. I mean, like most people around me were like, this is a very stupid idea. But I feel like when you make these sort of decisions, you're gonna get that kind of response. Like
Hmm.
when you tell the average person, yeah, I'm leaving university to go and write about professional wrestling full time, it's not gonna get the best reaction, shockingly. So I felt partly like there was a little bit of doubt there, but ultimately, you know, those kind of hearing those kind of questions in a way motivated me because I kind of
Hmm.
wanted to prove people wrong a little bit. And yeah, it kind of played a bit of a motivating factor more than anything else. Obviously, there were doubts there, but I felt confident enough in myself that I felt it was worthwhile.
This sounds like a backhanded compliment, but why were you so confident in your own abilities to be like, I can do this?
I think it's the I feel like I done very well at Inside the Ropes considering, we started that website from nothing. When I joined Into the Ropes, I think I joined about 5 days after that website started. Started off initially as a writer, and then sort of transitioned to the more social media side of stuff and kind of helped grow the site, social media, literally from the ground up to and arguably one of the biggest UK media outlets for wrestling.
I
So
would agree.
I I would kind of I felt like I had enough experience in my back pocket. I felt like I had gotten the best benefits I could of out of university. I kind of just felt like if it's gonna be if I want to take this chance, it's a now or never kind of thing. And I thought, why not?
Correct me if I'm wrong. Did these things happen simultaneously? You left uni, but then like a month later decided to leave Inside the Ropes.
So yeah, that was a weird period. That wasn't that close, but I did. So I left university. When did I leave university? Officially, I
January, I
left
believe.
university. Yeah, around that time. And then I decided I was still doing bits and pieces for Inside the Rope, but I kind of decided to take a back foot from certain things. I'm still doing little bits like the we were doing live reactions on the Inside the Ropes Clips channel, and I was doing occasional little writing pieces. But I took a step back from like the social media sides of stuff, which I've been doing full time by that point, I think for about 2 years. And I
Mm,
kind of what I wanted to take I wanted to take what I'd gotten there and apply it to either a real job, or B, take it to another wrestling based outlet organization and kind of try and diversify my portfolio a bit, because I always kind of felt like, as much as I really like what I'm doing Inside the Ropes, I
mm.
always wanted to make sure my eggs weren't all in one basket, just in the off chance. You never really know what's going to happen. So I always kind of was just wanted to be a little bit safer of like, I want to grow my portfolio, but I also want to just make sure that like not everything is invested in this one place in case something goes wrong. And that kind of was ultimately what led to that decision.
What was the moment, because you talk about social media there, was there a moment that you were like, I spend too much time on social media. I need to take a step back from doing this social media stuff for Inside the Ropes?
It's funny because, as much as I've worked in social media for X amount of years, I hate using social media. Me
Mm.
personally, I do not like using social media. If I could, I would not have it. Twitter maybe, and maybe like Reddit or something like that, but I am not a fan of it. So it was a mixture of that and kind of feeling like I'd been doing a lot of the same sort of stuff over the past 2 years, and I kind of wanted to challenge myself a little bit, either by taking it outside the wrestling industry or doing it for another outlet. So it was kind of a combination of that, and just wanting to try and move on and kind of change things up a little bit, and that's kind of what led that.
What was the moment like where you told the great man that is Kenny McIntosh, you're like,
Hmm.
I'm stepping away? What was that moment like?
It was scary is probably the easiest way to sum it up, because I'd been it's we I technically I've officially I've been doing social media stuff for Inside the Ropes for about 3 years, but like in terms of just in general, I've been doing social media site stuff for them for like 6 or 7, because I started with Inside the Ropes when I was just a fan. I started up like a Facebook fan group, so
Yeah.
I did that for a couple of years, and then that's how that led into working for them officially with the whole website and whatnot. So it was weird to kind of go to him and say, you know, I want to step away from what essentially I've been doing for the past 6 years. I want to try and like I basically just told him what I told you. I want to try and challenge myself. I want to try and do something a little bit different, whether or not, and take what I've learned here and do it elsewhere. I just didn't want to, shut the door on ITR, because I certainly, I still haven't. Even when I took that breakaway, I was still doing stuff for them fairly regularly. So I kind of wanted, I said mainly what I said to you, and that I kind of want to just diversify what I'm doing. Kind of want to challenge myself. I feel like I'm at that point in my life where I've gotten everything I could at that point from what I was doing at ITR, and move on.
Mm. It sounds like with the social media and starting almost like a fan page, you had a very similar origin story to the great man that is Fraser Porter from
Mm.
the Cultaholic crew. So have there
Yes.
been any sort of overlap between the two at all?
Weirdly, well, me and Fraser knew each other, I think, just from talking on Twitter back in the day, like very early when we were both like just fans very early on. I think we kind of just connected randomly, whether I think it was maybe through What Culture or Cultaholic at some point, just randomly started talking to each other through Twitter. And we became friends. And then at one point I saw he started up that Facebook group for Cultaholic, and I went, that's a good idea. Gonna steal that. So technically, Fraser Porter is responsible for this. But I've spoken to Fraser quite a few times. In fact, I spoke to him. When I speak to him, I spoke to him about a month or so ago. I met with him in Edinburgh. So yeah, we're still really good friends. We still chat quite a lot. But technically, Fraser is responsible for where I am today.
So basically, what you want to say is Fraser launched your career?
If you want to use those words, I'm not going to say no.
Okay. Okay. So we will go into that little bit before, which is how did you discover wrestling as a fan? Then where is your current fandom now?
So I had a bit of I feel like a lot of people kind of find out wrestling when they're a kid, and it's something that kind of like comes out from childhood. For me, it kind of started like that. Like I was a little bit into like wrestling as a kid. I watched like the DVDs and I had like the annuals and stuff, but I never watched like week to week TV, because it was always on like Sky and like channels that I never really had when I was a kid. So I kind of watched it on and off for a little while and then fell out of it. And it was only when the WWE Network popped back up that I actually like tried properly getting into it full time. I think weirdly, for whatever reason, I don't remember why, but the first match I remember from like first watching wrestling was Dolph Ziggler versus Sheamus in a Kiss Me Arse match. And
Oh
somehow that
yes,
got me
I
to
remember
stay.
this.
So, I mean, I watched that. I think the thing that really got me into it properly was NXT. I think it was NXT Unstoppable. And I remember there was
Mm.
I think it was a main event with Becky versus Sasha.
Mm.
And I remember watching that and I got super invested into NXT. And from there, obviously, TakeOver started up and NXT, the ball of NXT really started rolling.
Mm. So where would you say your current fandom is?
It's kind of changed in the last couple of years. I think especially because of COVID. I went through like a really big phase of like really like an independent wrestling. I went to a lot of the shows around the UK, went to like Progress, ICW, OTT in Ireland, a lot of different places like that. Obviously with COVID and that's become less of a thing. Nowadays more like if I'm gonna sit down and just watch wrestling casually, it's probably gonna be something like New Japan. I consistently watch Wrestle Kingdom. Occasionally I do watch NXT. Like NXT I try keep up with as in terms of like my one weekly show. I used to be a big lover of AEW, but that's kind of fell off when they've started like, Rampage, Collision, Dynamite. You have to watch so many hours at this
So
point.
much.
Yeah, at this point, whereas NXT, I can just sit and it's 2 hours and it's fine. I keep up to date and there's pay-per-views every couple of months. So I don't have to keep super invested. But yeah, I would say like a mixture of like New Japan and NXT at this point.
Mm. So you talked about diversifying your portfolio
Hmm.
earlier in this conversation. So how did your conversations with the great man that is Nick Hausman start to uh, join the House of Wrestling group as one of his writers?
So I spoke to Nick. So I went to the Money in the Bank in London back in July this past summer.
Hmm.
And as part of that, I just went to, caught up with the Inside the Ropes guys that were there, Kenny and whatnot. Nick had started doing stuff for Inside the Ropes around that time. I think he was providing interviews or something for them occasionally. So he started doing that. He came along to the show and he met up with us, and I felt we got along really, really well. That was the same sort of conversation I also had with Kenny about maybe I could come back and start doing more regular stuff again, which is how my current stuff with like writing and whatnot
Mm.
started. So I spoke to Nick and whatnot, and there was never really anything discussed about, me writing for House of Wrestling at that point. It was kind of just, meeting up and chatting and whatnot. And then a couple of weeks later, I think he put out a thing on Twitter about asking for if anyone wanted to write. And I gave him a message, went through the process and whatnot, and at the other end, it kind of came out. I would do some writing, and I would also manage House of Wrestling social media, given my background at Inside the Ropes.
Mm.
And from there, over the last couple of months, I think I've consistently written every couple of days for the last few weeks, and it's been it's been interesting. I really because it's very as much as it's kind of the same subject matter as ITR, it's very different way of doing things. A because
Yeah,
it's the American site. B again starting up from the ground up. The way Nick wants to do things is very different from the way ITR wants to do things. So it's been an interesting challenge.
you brought up there the differences between Nick Hausman and Kenny McIntosh. What are the differences as people? How are they as wrestling fans? Have you seen that?
Yeah, Kenny is very old school focused. He does like modern wrestling, but I feel if you spoke to him directly, he would definitely say like his favorite era. I mean, his two dogs are named after Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage. So I mean, I
Mm.
think that tells you all you need to know. I know he's a very he loves the old school sort of stuff, which I do enjoy. A couple of years ago, I watched through all the old WrestleManias, and I kind of understood like it's not something that I would watch regularly, but I understood the appeal of it, and I enjoyed what I saw of it. Whereas Nick, I feel, is a lot more focused on like modern stuff and very the focus of the both of them in terms of like how they want to take their websites. So Kenny is like, they're focusing kind of more on old school stuff and also the ITR exclusives. Nick more focusing on like his own exclusives, in terms of his own sources and whatnot. So they're very different people, but also make for very like interesting bosses and whatnot.
You brought up interesting bosses there. What is
Hmm.
something you've learned from both Nick and Kenny?
Kenny would be more how to like a lot of presentation skills. So when I started out with Inside the Ropes, I was doing a lot of interviews and stuff like that, kind of just to build up my own skills just in talking and whatnot. So I kind of, went to him and got some advice on like, not even just interviewing on video, but how he interviews on stage and stuff like that, and learning stuff like that, and having a sort of presence to command a conversation and stuff like that. With Nick, it's more focused on like content writing and how to like present stuff in more of a news kind of fashion, if you know what I mean. Kind of like
Yeah.
how to present. ITR is very obviously news focused as well, but how Nick's and House of Wrestling is kind of more like presenting stuff in a more informative manner and kind of making and more news kind of focus is the best way I can put it. So I would feel like they're very different things I've learned from both of them, but equally as important.
Who are some people within the wrestling media that you're like, they're great. I would love to sit under their learning tree.
Oh, back in the day, I had a lot. I'm trying to think. See, it's weird. I sort of started out kind of like when I was a lot younger, kind of wanting to like get into like video game media because I'm a huge video games fan aside from wrestling. So one of the like big people I initially got into was a like content creator called Total Biscuit, who's sadly passed away now.
Yeah.
But he was like a big influence on me growing up and kind of seeing the people who are kind of similar to him and trying to take what he done for gaming, trying to transcend that into wrestling. So I was influenced by him a lot. Who else in wrestling media? Kenny, obviously, because I was a big fan of Kenny from like even from the What Culture days. I watched him on the podcast. Then also followed him when he went over to Inside the Ropes. It's funny, Stephen Larson actually from their very very early days. They are part of the reason why I got into wrestling. When Going and Raw started, they had a third host with it was them and Nerd Cubed, and Nerd Cubed I
Yeah.
was a big fan of from YouTube, and I started watching it from him, and that's how I sort of gradually started watching wrestling again. So kind of a mixture of all three of those, I would say.
Very, very cheap, nasty plug. I shouldn't admit
Mm-hmm.
this, but there is an interview with Steve that just went on the
There we
channel.
go.
Please go check that out. Thank you very much, Innes.
It works out. There we go.
Yeah. So you brought up who are some people you talked about your influences and people like that. When it comes to video games and things like that, if an opportunity to work for somewhere like Triple Jump or things like that came about, would that be something you'd be interested in, or are you someone that's like, I'm in the wrestling niche, I want to stay in the wrestling niche?
No, video games is definitely something I want to explore at some point. I've always I think right now my kind of thing would be I would love to try and like split my like freelance stuff between video games and wrestling because I feel like if you invest in too much in one niche, you're eventually going to burn yourself out, and I'm very afraid to do that with wrestling. So I kind of want to, diversify it a little bit more. Also, just because I love video games, and when I'm not, writing about wrestling, I'm pretty much playing video games. I have a Nintendo Switch, a PlayStation 5, my PC in front of me here, so I love games, but I would love to do that, especially from kind of like something I've not really got to do a lot of in wrestling is kind of like more interviewee exclusive stuff of like directly talking to people and finding out stuff. It's not really something I've got an opportunity to do in wrestling, but I would love to do it in games.
If Nick or Kenny came to you and said, we want you to, I know you've done some for Inside the Ropes, but we want you to do this exclusive interview with XYZ, would that be
Hmm.
something you'd be interested in?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've done interviews. I think the last interview I did,
Brody King?
yeah, Brody King, or I think Brody King or M. Dickey was the last one. I think it probably was Brody, yeah, but it's been about a year and a half now. It's interviews are always kind of tricky because you have to, it depends on the kind of outlet and the kind of purpose that you're going into the interview with. And I kind of feel like the way I've always had to do interviews is for website content, which is good and fine, but I've always felt a little bit pressured to make sure you get a clickable headline, make sure you get them to say
Mm,
something that, would be interesting.
mm.
Whereas
So
like with with like something for example like video interviews for example, I feel like that would be more suitable for me because you're trying to create their content that people want to watch and enjoy rather than little bite-sized pieces that you can then repurpose.
mm, you brought up your love of video games and stuff. So, and you also brought up burnout. And one thing we talked about in social media, because we talk on social media on occasion, is
Yeah.
like you were very burned out with Inside the Ropes and stuff, and that is why
Yep.
you stepped away. What
Yep.
has Innes put in place now so that burnout doesn't creep in now that you're working for two platforms.
I think a lot of it is stepping away from the social media side of things. 'Cause the problem, as much as social media is sort of my niche and something that I feel I'm very good at, the problem is there's always this pressure in your back of the mind of like if a story breaks, no matter what, I have to be available to like push it on all the platforms and stuff like that. And that is a very bad mindset because you pretty much never get to switch off, which is not good and a very easy way to burn out, as I
Mm.
found out personally. So it's a lot of just trying to step back from that mindset and kind of realize it's it's not the end of the world if something gets delayed by an hour or two or whatever, and also moving on to more like content creation side of things with news writing and whatnot. I'm really enjoying doing that right now and kind of learning about how to create content for the site directly rather than how to promote that to then
Mm.
other people. So that's kind of focusing more on that side and kind of stepping away from that pressure has really helped.
Do you view, because at the start of this conversation, we talked about you dropping out of uni to pursue your wrestling media dream. Do you view it as a success so far?
So far, I think so. Yeah, in terms of like experience I've gotten, I've been officially now I've been doing this for about 3 years, and I've worked with WWE, I've worked with AEW, interviewed people from New Japan, interviewed people from all over the industry, Bianca Belair. So I definitely think it's a success in terms of like from the content side and also from the social media side. Building up ITR, not just from like a numbers perspective, but from like my own confidence perspective, being able to like grow that and see that I've been able to grow that into something that big is really great. So yeah, I would definitely say it's a success.
You also talked about, like I said, burnout earlier in this conversation. So, what would, shall we say, burned out, ready to leave inside the ropes, Innes, think of what you're doing now? And what would you say to burned out Innes if you could have a conversation with him now?
I think they would be very happy that they kind of reclaimed their love of wrestling somewhat, because I kind of felt like at that time it wasn't even a case of like I don't want to do like wrestling media stuff anymore. I was a I don't want to watch wrestling anymore kind of thing. I was not even I was it wasn't a strictly a burned out ITR thing. It was a burnout on wrestling in general
Okay,
kind of thing, which I think is inevitable. I was watching wrestling consistently at that point
there's
for
so much.
about 8 years. And at some point, regardless of how much you love something, at some point you have to like take a step back and indulge in other things. It's just an inevitability. And yeah, I think he'd be very happy that they reclaimed some of that love for wrestling, but also that he was stepping away from the social media side of things and trying new stuff. Whilst within an industry that I'm familiar with, but also trying something different and kind of growing in that way, if you get what I mean.
Definitely. What would you say to burned out Innes though?
I think just take a step back, take a little breather, try and explore other options, whether it be inside wrestling, whether it be outside wrestling, just take a step back for a little while, try and focus on, other things, try and, take a step away from wrestling. Because I think ultimately that taking that couple months away from just wrestling stuff in general really sort of helped.
So when you did take this time away, were you keeping up with products or was it strictly the WWE networks off my phone, Fight TV's off my phone? I'm not looking at anything.
It wasn't so strict as that. It was more a case of like I didn't feel like I had to keep up with everything that was going on, whether it be what's happening on Raw, what's happening on AEW Dynamite, what's happening on SmackDown. It kind of just I still did like watch the shows. I watched the pay per views. I think if it was like a minor one, I didn't mind missing it, but it was more of just a case of like I will consume wrestling for how I want to as a fan, rather than feeling like I have to consume this to make sure I'm informed enough to be able to do my job.
Mm. So you also brought up there, and you brought up earlier your friendship with Fraser Porter. Do you and your love of video games? Do you think we could ever connect the two? And if Triple Jump came to you, would that be something you'd be interested in doing?
For sure. I mean, I've talked to Fraser a couple of times about like he's got a couple of friends who work in like the games industry in general. So I would definitely love to do something like that. It's just kind of unfortunately opportunities never arose, but it's something that I would I love Triple Jumps content. I've watched their stuff for a little while, so I would love to try that if that was an opportunity that ever arose.
That's very, very cool. As we look at wrapping this up, my friend, because I do want to be respectful of your time, we are going to do a segment you may remember from last time, which is
Mm.
generic questions. And this is where I ask my guests their favorite match, favorite pay per view, favorite wrestler's entrance theme, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Basically, the questions that I feel Innes might be asked on social media. So now he'll have a place to be like, guys, I've answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite match of all time?
So I think the last time I spoke to you, I think I probably mentioned Bailey versus Sasha Banks, which is
You did.
still very high up there. And I think that's probably still number one because it's the kind of match that I would show to someone who's not a fan and be like, this has everything that I love about wrestling. But more recently, Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay from this past year's Wrestle Kingdom was exceptional, and I think is probably number two in my list. I'd say my top three is Bailey Sasha, Omega Ospreay, Undertaker Shawn Michaels Mania 25 because Omega Ospreay is such a good match, and also the video game lover in my heart had just went mad when Kenny Omega came out as Sephiroth from Final Fantasy VII. So I adore that match.
That's very, very cool. And then, what about your favorite overall pay per view or event?
Oh, it's probably got to be a live event. If you, I would probably say over the past year there's been so many really really cool live events in the UK. All in Money in the Bank and Clash at the Castle. It's tied very closely for me between Money in the Bank and All In, and I would probably go with Money in the Bank purely because All In was a really cool experience, and I don't think that's something that atmosphere I'm never going to feel again. But the seats were not great. We were on the floor near the back, so as you can imagine, we couldn't see anything. Whereas
Mm.
Money in the Bank, we were literally right above the entrance ramp. So I lost my mind when John Cena came out, and it was just a really fun, cool experience. So I would say probably Money in the Bank 2023.
Very, very cool. What about your favorite wrestler's entrance music?
It changes a lot. And over the last couple of years, since they changed the music to Def Rebel in WWE, I've kind of felt a bit like, they're okay. But they've come out with some really good ones recently. LA Knight's one is fantastic and is is creeping up my Spotify and making Spotify come back, WWE come back in my Spotify, which is I was been trying to keep that away and it's not working. So I would probably say LA Knights right now.
And then, what about your favorite tag team?
Hmm. Let's see. I would have said FTR a while back, but they've kind of fell off a little bit recently with the whole, them losing the tag titles all of a sudden and then kind of disappearing for a little bit, and obviously the issues with Cash Wheeler. I did love the Young Bucks back in the day, but again, for the same sort of reasons, they fell off recently. Um, I would probably say right now it is actually probably the Young Bucks, but I'm not a huge lover of tag team wrestling. I've got to
Yeah,
admit to you, but I would say probably the Young Bucks have been the most consistent over the last couple of years, and I love their stuff in Ring of Honor and in New Japan and now in AEW.
that's very, very cool. And then finally, in this, the biggest generic question, in my opinion, who's your
Hmm.
favorite overall wrestler?
I think it's still got to be Kenny Omega. I think just as an overall performer, he has the kind of cadence that I love about wrestling. His in ring stuff is obviously phenomenal. He's also a massive nerd, so all the video game references of his move set and his name, just makes me love him. So Kenny Omega it has to be.
That's very, very cool. And then, as we wrap this up in this, the question I end all my interviews on is, as you know, I believe as YouTubers, podcasters, people with social media in general, we're all sort of gonna live forever if you think about the world in some sort of very strange way. So, what is one piece of content you're like, I'd like to be remembered for that? And then, what is one that you're like, yuck, I don't want to be remembered for that at all?
So the yuck one I can immediately think of. So there's a video, I believe if you search Ennis McVey on YouTube, one of the top results is me singing Mickey James's theme as a punishment from one of our Inside the Ropes live reactions. And it is one of the worst things that ever exists of me. And I want to point out on record, I purposefully sang badly. So I am not that bad of a singer, but I purposely did it for entertainment purposes. But I would like to get rid of that because that is horrific and it doesn't put me in a very good light. In terms of content I want to be remembered for, it's all weirdly it's stuff that I'm not in front of the camera of. One of the things I've been really proud of doing lately is I've started working on the Inside the Ropes live tours, and I've started helping them out with that. And I've done over the last couple of years, I've done like behind the camera stuff for various interviews and stuff like that. So in terms of like content I want to be remembered by, it's kind of content that I've kind of worked on behind the scenes, whether it be you know at Clash at the Castle, I did a video with WWE doing a behind the scenes look at a promotional video they did with Damien Priest. Interviews, being behind the scenes for that, and obviously, work producing the camera and the video side of stuff for the Inside the Ropes live events.
That's very, very cool, my friend. So as we wrap this up, obviously I want to say thank you to Innes for coming back on. Thank you for a
Thank you,
great
Tom.
conversation as always. But promote yourself, my good friend. Where can the good people find you, your content, etc.?
You can pretty much find me. My username on most places is Innes_McVey, INNES_MCVEY. However, my name is rare enough that you can just search Innes McVey and you'll probably find me because shockingly no one else has my name. But that's generally where you can find me. Twitter at Innes_McVey, YouTube, and what else do I have? I think that's the main ones. Yeah. Oh, and obviously Inside the Ropes, itlwrestling.com for my Inside the Ropes articles, houseofwrestling.com for my stuff over there.
It's well worth doing, guys. Not only one of the most hardworking people in this space, but one of the nicest as well. So if you guys like
Thank you,
this,
Tom.
make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talk Trash on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Talk Trash. But I will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.